stories you're about to hear are real. They've been taken from the reels of Hollywood movies. The names have been changed to protect the identity of those films. This is not true crime. This is real crime scenes. Welcome to another episode of Real Crime Scenes. I'm your host, Bubbawheat, and the story you're about to hear is a crime that occurred in a movie. The names have been changed, and additional details have been included to fill out the story and to keep the film's identity a secret, but I would love it if you would share your guesses with me on Threads and social media where I'm at Bubbawheat, or email me at realcrimescenes@gmail.com. The answer will also be revealed in our next episode, where my guest and I will discuss the movie and the crimes that were committed. So for now, here is the case of the Shelbyville Murders. March 9th, 1984. Angela Brooks, Mary Martin, James Butler, and Dave Rogers were all seniors at Shelbyville High School in Ohio. Dave was in a band, and they were all looking forward to going away for spring break in a few weeks. But they had no idea what terrors were about to be in store for them all. Mary and Angela had been best friends throughout high school. They both enjoyed school and were decent students. Mary was practically never in trouble, which isn't too surprising, as her father was a police officer. She lived in a nice house in the suburbs, and right next door to her lived James Butler. They had known each other practically all of their lives, but only started dating a few months ago. James loved music, and while he was far from what anyone would consider a bad boy, he was a bit of a slacker. Angela also had a boyfriend herself. She was dating Dave Rogers. Dave was the lead guitarist in a band, and got into occasional trouble at school, but never anything serious. He would frequently sneak out to visit Angela whenever he could, including on this night. Angela's parents had gone out of town for a couple days, and so she thought it was a good idea to have Mary over for a sleepover. They had both been stressed out quite a bit lately from school and typical family issues, and they thought it was a good idea to let off some steam. And of course their boyfriends, James and Dave, thought it was a good idea to take advantage of this unsupervised situation to come visit their girlfriends in a big empty house. James came up with the story that he was actually staying over at his cousin's house, and his cousin was supposed to cover for him. Meanwhile, Dave simply snuck out of his house to come over. It was never fully clear what happened that night. Besides quite a bit of teenage sex. But long after the throe of teenage passions had quieted down and everyone had fallen asleep for the night, the peaceful quiet was broken by a different kind of screaming that cut right to the bones. Mary tried to get into the bedroom where Angela and Dave were sleeping, but it was locked. Once Dave finally opened the door, she was greeted by a waking nightmare. Angela had several deep stab wounds in her chest, but what was more unexpected was that there was blood everywhere in the room. On the bed, up the walls, lamps were knocked over and broken. There was even blood on the ceiling. The coroner's report would later show that she also had severe bruising all over her body, but she didn't have any apparent defensive wounds. The police report came to the conclusion that Dave suspected Angela had been cheating on him and waited for her to fall asleep, where he then worked himself up into a jealous rage, stabbed her 4 times in the chest, and threw her around the room in anger. He then fled the scene and attempted to go into hiding, but the police were able to capture him and place him into custody the following day. Both Mary and James claimed that Dave had never acted in anger towards Angela before that day, and had no knowledge of any infidelity, although this claim was contradicted by multiple other students, who claimed that they saw Angela and Dave arguing at school just earlier the day before. March 10th, 1984. Despite witnessing her friend's death the night before, Mary soldiered on and went to school, where she tried to get back to normalcy and keep her mind off of that horrible night. But during one of her classes, she suffered a complete and total mental breakdown, yelling and screaming until one of her classmates finally calmed her down and she was able to go home early. March 11th, 1984. Dave was being held in the local jail cell, but apparently the guilt was too much for him. He had taken his bed sheets and twisted them into a makeshift rope, where he then looped them around the bars of his cell, tied a knot around his neck, and hung himself. At the time, it seemed like an open and shut case. A sad but unfortunately not uncommon crime of passion, but there was still a killer on the loose in this small suburban town, and that killer wasn't quite finished with their victims. March 19th, 1984. A little over a week had gone by, and Mary and Glenn had attended the funerals of their friends and tried to cope with their life without them. Mary was struggling pretty hard. She was having trouble sleeping. She was struggling in her classes. According to her mother, she even fell asleep while taking a bath and almost drowned. Both James and Mary's parents thought that their relationship was a bad idea and had taken steps to keep them apart. Mary's parents even installed bars on all their windows for added security and to minimize teenage indiscretions. And James's parents took their phone off the hook after repeated late-night phone calls. Shortly after midnight that same evening, James's mother went in to check on him. The scene that she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. There was blood everywhere. It had completely soaked through the bed. It was all over the walls, all over the ceiling, everywhere throughout the room. James's body was completely unrecognizable. It had been completely dismembered, and there was practically nothing left of him to be identified. Even the police that were called to the scene said they had never seen anything to a person to this degree. Only a few hours later, right next door at Mary's house, while the police were still swarming over James's house, there was a fire that started in their basement and had spread up the stairs. It was quickly contained and did minimal damage, and police later suspected that it was Mary herself that had set the fire to destroy evidence. And suddenly Mary became the new prime suspect in James's death and was possibly even involved in the murder of Angela. Mary claimed that there was someone else that was attacking all of them, but at the time that seemed like just a story, as there was no clear evidence of any other person in either death. It was believed that maybe Mary had a secret relationship with Dave and worked with him to murder Tina. In fact, when the basement of their house was searched while investigating the fire, they found a knife hidden in the furnace that could have easily been the same murder weapon that killed Angela, although at the time they were unable to make a definite match. All right, so thank you for joining me today. And when did you become involved in this case?
I started off a beat cop around the same time the first murder had started. I wasn't called to the scene, but I was in the station when the news came out, and I was there in the station again when Dave was brought in for questioning. Well, questioning, I say questioning, but we all know he did it.
Yeah. So, what was the feeling around the station whenever he came in? After that first murder, and especially once Dave committed suicide in jail, did everybody pretty much think that it was an open and shut case and that it was wrapped up at that point in time?
He was in the room of the murder, and it was a locked room. No one else was in there. Everyone knew, it was case shut.
Yeah, and then roughly a week later, we had the death of James, and that was incredibly gruesome. It was the feeling in the police station like had anybody seen anything like that before?
I was there that night. The first few officers that were called in, they were outside vomiting. To this day, I've never seen anything like it. It was like if you threw someone in a wood chipper. That's the only thing I could possibly say to describe what I saw. There was gore everywhere. There was fascia, shattered bones. To this day, I have no idea. We couldn't find any evidence of any large industrial items being brought that could anything close to explain what happened. Uh, Someone had mentioned the possibility of it being a bomb, so there was talk about calling in the bomb squad, but we didn't see anything to confirm that.
Yeah, and his parents were in the house, and they, I imagine they didn't, mention hearing any loud noises such as a bomb, right?
Nothing such as that. The only thing they said they heard was, oh, those poor people. They said they heard almost gallons of liquid hitting the walls. Oh.
Wow,
So
I can't even imagine being in that situation myself. And as of right now, aside from Dave and Angela, the case for James's murder is still unsolved. That hasn't been closed. Is that correct? Are there any theories about about who is involved?
I have theories, but there are elements of this case that will make me think we'll never have the full answer. Mainly because one of the suspects, Mary, her father is in law enforcement as well. Now, I have had cases, you'll bring in a drunk driver, you'll bring in someone for a minor assault, like a bar brawl, assault charges. You book them in, you come back the next day, they're gone. No paperwork can't be found. You find out later on they were relative or kid of a fellow officer. So I don't want to say that's every precinct, but the city is known for its secrets.
Yeah. So with Mary's father being a police officer, was there ever talk of there being a conflict of interest with him working on this case, with James being her boyfriend and being their next door neighbor as well?
It was unspoken. It was a small precinct, and he was one of the more senior members there. It's just back in those days, it's just something you didn't bring up unless there was blatant regard of corruption. But in this case, no one said a word.
And then there were the Dave and Mary both had spoken of seeing another person. Was there anybody else that was a potential suspect? Did you look into who that potential figure might have been?
Let me think. There was an older case. See, this is years back before. It was involving a case that the ball had been dropped on. There was a man who was a murderer, and we brought him in, but his lawyer argued that his rights were not read to him, so he got let out. Now, a few days later, he was found dead. There's arson, but there wasn't a huge investigation on it. I remember the name got brought up during this case, so I decided to look into it, if he had possibly any family members that may hold a grudge against the people of this town. And I did find out he had a daughter by the name of Winnie. Now, there's nothing official about this part of the investigation. It was more me just taking care of my own curiosity. But I looked into it, and she was well out of the state at the same time of the murders, although she would have been 23 at the time.
Interesting. So, you ruled her out then?
Yes, I did rule her out. She was never an official suspect. It was, once again, it was more settling my curiosity.
All right, well, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
September 13th, 1991. It's been over 6 years after the Shelbyville murders, and it was decided to run the knife found in Mary's basement through DNA testing to determine if it was actually the murder weapon. But what they found instead was DNA linking the weapon to one Richard Jones, who had been convicted for the murders of 20 children all the way back in 1966. He was released just a few weeks later due to a technicality, and then died in a suspected arson just a few days after his release. No one was convicted in that arson case, but there were many suspected participants, including the parents of all 4 teenagers involved in these Shelbyville murders. It was also discovered that Richard Jones had a daughter named Winnie, and she had been placed into foster care and moved out of state, but she would have been in her early 20s during the time of the Shelbyville murders and could have had revenge as a motive. She was questioned by police, but claimed she was still out of state during the time of the murders, and there wasn't anything other than circumstantial evidence, and to this day there are still questions about these murders that can't be answered. If you have any information about these murders, and think you know what movie I've been describing, then tag me on social media, especially Threads, where I'm at Bubbawheat, or send an email to realcrimescenes@gmail.com, and I will give one of the first to correctly guess the movie a shout-out on the reveal and discussion episode releasing in 2 weeks. And until next time, remember this is not true crime, these are real crime scenes.